That felt like it was just pulled out of their hat. What was I gonna say?
We are now entering the wormhole, Captain. The wormhole has collapsed. This wormhole has its entry point at the same place as its exit point. How does that work? Everything seems fine, except that we've landed back where we started, but a brief moment before we went in.
Hey, you want to go on a mind walk with me? What's a mind walk? I don't know, some kind of thing where you walk with your mind? Something about telepathy? Something about mind control? You may think this name is suggestive about what happens in this episode. You'd be right, it has something to do with the mind. I would call it an interesting title, and this was an interesting episode. It wins where the past few episodes have failed. However, it's par for the course for this last slew of episodes. That being moving the plot along, maintaining my interest, but not being super interesting, not being super memorable, thematically, symbolically. In this slew of episodes, that being the ones after A Moral Story Part 2, there has been some real standout episodes, there's been some ho-hum, and there's been a lot of episodes that logically move the plot along. This is one of those episodes. It got better on repeat viewings. That's a good sign. But it doesn't really creatively break the bank. It relies on tired tropes that are par for the course in this genre, even recently. This episode features mind swapping. We just did a startrek transfer in Strange New Worlds, so don't color me impressed, but this one played out a little bit better than that episode, that being Strange New Worlds. This is Prodigy. Let's all see what went down in Mind Walk. This is episode 18. I believe the next episode is going to be the first part of the two-parter, which will serve as the season finale. We're wrapping up what was admittedly a very good season, I think. They would have to do a lot wrong in the last two episodes to ruin the season for me. A lot wrong. So, no need to get upset if you loved Prodigy or didn't. This episode, thankfully, is concluding the I have no mouth and I must talk phase. There's this mini arc, or large arc, if you consider 4 or 5 episodes to be a sizable arc, where we need to communicate with the Dauntless. The Dauntless has Janeway on it. If we can just talk to Janeway, we can tell her what her problem is, but we can't because we cannot contact another ship using technological communications because we have the living construct, a device embedded in the protostar that will infect Starfleet itself, ship to ship, and destroy all those ships, and thus crippling Starfleet. We have to find alternative communication methods. This has been going on for many episodes now. It got very stale, but thankfully I think they ended it right at the moment I was about to get upset with it. This episode sees, finally, the communication between Dauntless and Protostar. How does this communication take place? Well, if you remember, in the past few episodes, I had speculated that we could use Morse code. We could take Zero and try to telepathically communicate. We ran through these ideas, and we decided on telepathic communication. Our episode starts with the Dauntless in hot pursuit. They merge their warp bubbles. Dauntless does this forcibly, I would assume. Why is the protostar leaving? You would think that the living construct, being in control now, would just allow itself to sit there and get its shields taken down, boarded, and then infect the Dauntless through communications means. You know, if the protostar shields are down, it gets boarded. The Dauntless crew surely would try to arrest control of the ship somehow, thereby infecting the Dauntless. You'd think the protostar would allow itself to be caught. However, it has not. It has escaped at warp. Or is it quantum slipstream? I don't know. They've merged their warp bubbles. This has happened before. This is not out of the realm of possibility. Except that when this was done, admittedly hundreds of years ago, it was a complicated process. I'm willing to buy that the Dauntless has availed itself of technology that allows this process to be simple. However, I don't think it literally looks like a bubble. Like in this episode, when the warp bubbles merge, it literally looks like two soap bubbles merging. It looks like liquid. Peculiar, not how I would have done it, but it gets the point across. We're in the same warp bubble, therefore we can travel through localized space between the two ships without being destroyed. They've essentially rendezvoused with each other, which means that the relative speed between both vessels is 0. So one could transfer across crew, cargo, what have you, as long as we maintain relative speed with each other. That's how space works. There's no need to get into that here, but suffice to say, physical communication between two ships is not possible. What's strange is that at the beginning of this episode, Dr. Newham alerts the crew of the Dauntless to the presence of the protostar by seeing the protostar through a window. Ding, ding, ding. He sees it through the window. Perimeter alerts? I guess not. We eventually go, like I said, with the telepathic style communication. We have nothing else left to try. We're just gonna use hope at this point. Remember how Dal activated his ancient proto-Organian genes in order to read Okana's mind? That's what we're gonna do. You're gonna say, "Wow, this is crazy. We're swapping minds between Janeway and Dal." It's not that crazy. Organians used to do this. There is precedent in Star Trek on multiple occasions for Organians who are a non-corporeal being at this point to do mind swaps, mind control, that kind of thing. They do specify his proto or ancient Organian DNA from an era where Organians were physical. Hence, the genetic material. If you don't remember, Dal, in his own words, was born from a petri dish. He is a mixture of his creator's favorite DNA building blocks, if you will. He's an augment. If we can tap into that Organian DNA, we can use the combined signal of Zero and Dal to create a psychic link with the Dauntless. They do this just as they are being hit by phaser fire, creating a physical link between the two ships. Dal's mind is now swapped with Janeway. Hijinks ensue. I had speculated previously that Janeway would somehow end up on the protostar. I didn't imagine it was like this. I'd venture to guess that nobody could have predicted that this is how Janeway would get in the protostar. But she did. In Dal's body. What ensues is a lot of funny scenes that seem tonally at odds with what this episode was trying to get across. This felt like a very serious episode. A serious, plot-driven, get the point across episode. Broken up with admittedly funny gags that left me thinking, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Is this funny? Is this serious? Is this dramatic? I don't know. Far be it from me to look a gift horse in the mouth. I'll take a funny scene when I can get it. And it's funny, unique, and I haven't really seen it before from Janeway. Such a serious character, and to see that character be reduced to a slapstick, it's interesting. We've developed Admiral Janeway in a serious and respectful way. We've earned this laugh, so I'm not going to complain about it too hard. We've earned this moment, I believe, just as Vindicator, Diviner, Dreadnought are about to subdue Janeway. They knock her out, lock her in a closet. Diviner is coming back to, I guess, deal the final blow. I don't know. She's gone. Well, the psychic mind transfer had occurred, right? Dal is now wandering around in the Dauntless in the body of Janeway, doing Janeway things, which amounts to controlling the ship, walking around and talking to officers, except she's awkwardly walking around about to fall, losing her balance, falling out of her chair, and spitting out coffee because it's disgusting. Dr. Newham says, like, I'm your doctor. Please, drink this coffee. Get yourself back together. Remember, she was drinking tea, so we got the payoff for that. Doctor's orders. She switched to tea. Now she tries coffee again. The setup, see? The setup and the payoff of Janeway spitting the coffee out, because I guess your mind controls your tastes. How do they drink this stuff? I love coffee, but I can understand how someone might think coffee is bitter and disgusting. Someone who wasn't used to it, like Dal. Dal's an alien, so I have no idea what he would think about it. But we're firing on the protostar. Stop! Don't fire in the protostar. I don't hurt my body of work, which is the protostar. Nice save, Dal. Teamwork gets the dream work. Dal leaves the bridge, leaves it to you guys. You guys can handle it. Antennas, you got this. Commander Tyces. It appears that the protostar is approaching Federation space. Essentia, conveniently, who is the Vindicator, says, maybe we should get a bunch of other ships there to, ambush the protostar. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more, say no more. Tyces agrees and he sends out an order to get a lot of ships on that vector to interrupt the protostar. Convenient for the living construct, convenient for the Diviner's plan. Meanwhile, in the protostar, how are we going to get our minds swapped back? Well, isn't this a funny occurrence? Dal being controlled by Janeway, being performed by the voice actor for Dal, is a fantastic, defining moment performance for the show. Dal, Janeway, sounds so much like Janeway. It's frightening. It's a wonderful performance. You see Dal completely vocally embody Janeway. Mannerisms, the way he moves, just the way words are enunciated. I've seen so much Janeway, I'm sure you have too if you've seen Voyager, that if our mind is tuned to Janeway's vocal style, that if something didn't pass the sniff test, it would sound awful. But this was amazing. It worked. Dal sounded exactly like Janeway. Not so much the other way around. Admiral Janeway on the Dauntless didn't really feel that much like Dal to me. Maybe they were hamming it up a little bit too much for comedic effect. Again, not a big complaint because I found it genuinely funny. It's funny to see Admiral Janeway rolling around the floor going crazy, falling, running. Again, we've earned it. Okay, I would not accept this as our first introduction to Admiral Janeway in this show, but it's not, so we've earned this laugh. Dal as Janeway, or Janeway as Dal, whichever way you look at it, needs to figure out how we stop this living construct. You see, our communication is now complete. Janeway, the mind of Janeway, knows the plight of the protostar, knows who these characters are, knows that she has to stop the living construct. It's in the protostar. She goes down to look at it. She meets hologram Janeway. An interesting conversation between the two, feeling like hologram Janeway represents a younger version of Janeway. And if I'm not mistaken, I could hear the difference in their voices, although it's a little subtle, as you would imagine somebody who is aged 20 years, say, just throwing a number out there, might sound pretty similar to how they used to, but a little different. I guess it's as simple as returning hologram Janeway's memories. It's as simple to do that as it is just to reboot the computer. I believe what Admiral Janeway does at this point, that being Dal, to return hologram Janeway's memories, was just to reformat her, just to boop boop boop, press a few buttons. Rok-tahk couldn't figure that out, and we got her memories back, which is in a sense the ship's memories, the logs. So now Admiral Janeway knows what happens to Chakotay. This episode wastes no time in bringing Admiral Janeway up to the level of plot intelligence that a Protostar crew is at now. We're on the level now. Our enemy is clear. If it wasn't clear last time, it is confused a little bit in this episode. You'll see why. But we're running out of time, okay? Remember, while this is going on, we're at high warp, presumably, and we're going to Starfleet. That's bad. We cannot let the living construct get in contact with Starfleet, let alone the Dauntless. So we're going to have to do an EVA maneuver. We need to repeat what we did before, have a physical connection between the two ships to transfer our Katra between both Dal and Janeway. This involves EVA maneuvers. The crew of the Protostar is locked out of all functions of the Protostar, which, begs the question, how did they get an EVA hatch open? Maybe EVA hatch is some kind of emergency procedure or it's controlled in a way that is unique and separate from the living construct's control. I don't know. But what it amounts to is another superhero flying through space scene that we didn't need again. We had it in the episode Asylum. It's happening again. We're jumping out of the ship. Janeway says, "Who is Dal? I've been turned into a salamander before. This is nothing." Do you know what that's about? No spoilers, but it's a reference to my favorite episode of Voyager, Threshold. Janeway now has to move out of EVA maneuver out of a ship at warp through a connected warp bubble with another ship and then make physical contact with someone else on the other side who's doing the same thing. All in a day's work, buddy. So it goes ahead and Murph, doing the heroic, selfless Murph. Thank you, Murph. Murph is acting as an anchor or rope to extend the reach of Dal as Dal exits the Protostar. Unfortunately for Janeway, she just has to jump essentially towards the Protostar. Localized space has no inherent momentum to it. That's a good thing because we're in the same warp bubble. That means we can more easily connect with each other. Murph extends further, slacking off Murph's body, thus extending the distance that Dal can move. The physics here is breaking down a little bit for me. If Murph increases the length at which Murph is stretched, that doesn't push Dal further out, does it? Dal has already been restricted. He's lost the momentum he gained from his initial leaving of the Protostar. He can't get more without a jetpack, can he? That being said, do we not have jetpack-equipped EVA suits? If we were just going to phaser each other anyway, couldn't we just phaser each other from the EVA hatch door? Is there not a rope? Lots of questions here, and the answer they came up with was for dramatic purposes, maybe not logical purposes. Wouldn't it be cool just to have us touch each other through space? This has happened before. We've went from ship to ship during warp and Enterprise. Like I said, fantastical things happen this episode, but on repeat viewings, it gradually makes a little more sense. This is one of those things that doesn't quite. How do we fix this? Maybe we have a grappling hook. Maybe we have, like I said, a rope. Maybe Zero can float. Can Zero also float through space? Is Zero self-propelled? I had a lot of questions. Answers aren't always as good as having questions. I know I say that a lot. Sometimes the question is better than the answer, so maybe we'll leave this mystery alone. They do contact each other by closing the gap with phaser fire. This is going to sting a bit. Our minds are swapped back. We've sent the information we need to send. Janeway's back in her own body, back on the Dauntless, knowing what she knows. We need no longer fear the Dauntless, as long as the Diviner and Vindicator and Dreadnought don't completely subdue the Dauntless and take control. Which I thought would have happened by now, because Dreadnought is quite the fearsome fellow. It's surprising to me that Dreadnought hasn't lain waste to the crew of the Dauntless yet. How did Janeway get out of containment in Medbay when it was discovered that she wasn't in her own mind? Well, the diviner set her free. That felt like it was just pulled out of their hat. What was I gonna say? We needed a way to get Janeway out of Medbay so she can escape and do the mind switch with Dal. Oh, we'll just make the diviner do it. The diviner saves her. You know, you saved my life, now I saved yours. The diviner, of course, referring to the time where his body was just left lifeless in Tars Lamora, and was rescued by the crew of the Dauntless, that being Janeway. I'll let you free, just promise me one thing. If my mission fails, you look after my daughter, Gwyn. Either this is illogical, and it's not consistent with who the diviner was, or he's had a large change of heart. If you have one change of heart, the next change of heart is easier. Is he on the path to giving up on his mission and just allowing Gwyn to do whatever? Has he turned a new leaf? Is he going to turn against the Vindicator and Dreadnought? Remember in the episode, I think it was Terra Firma, the diviner at that point was willing to sacrifice his daughter to get the Protostar back. The Protostar was leaving. His daughter was being, I think, mangled by sentient vines or something, if I'm getting the right episode. And he chooses to go after the Protostar, I believe, instead of saving his daughter. Now it's the opposite. Now he's saving Janeway to spite his own mission, as long as you look after my daughter if my mission fails. They're kind of at odds with each other, but we need to remember that the diviner has gone through a life-threatening situation. When his mind was melted by Zero and he recovered on the Dauntless, he had a lot of time to think. He also had a lot of time to think on his home world preparing this mission. How do the two stack up? That's something that we're going to have to think about, and I think is the hidden kernel of intrigue in this episode. I'm not going to call it theme. I'm going to call it intrigue, drama perhaps. It's hidden in here, and you have to peel away the layers to get at it. But I think at the core, that's what was in this episode. Okay? Interesting scenes, yes. Essentia, or the Vindicator, pretending to be Essentia, talking to Dal, who was pretending to be Janeway. Interesting conundrum, layers upon layers, like an onion, they have layer. Interesting scenes, thematically not much going on. Musically, fantastic. I love the music in this. I kept noticing it. I was watching this, and the music was moving along, and the music was leading my emotion in interesting directions, making me feel uplifted at the right time and scared at the right time. The Dauntless shows up, a thumping musical invention that had me guessing, it had me thinking, it had me wanting more, it had me wishing this whole track was available when the Dauntless shows up. And then at the end, when we're reviewing the logs of what happened to the original Protostar crew, uplifting, heroic, but mysterious music that was in its own right triumphant, but also was saying, we need help. Go back and listen to this. There's a lot of interesting musical notes, interesting musical motifs. Whenever Janeway, in the body of Dal, has an uplifting Janeway speech to deliver, you hear notes, tastes, flavors of Voyager sneaking in to the music, and it's so fluid. It's so well done. One of the better episodes musically, I think this episode was. I'm looking forward to what they do for the last two musically. That's when you really want to break the bank, so to speak, on music. This episode is important. It gets across how we end, like I say, the lack of communication arc, if you will. It threatens on being boring because it is a continuation of that arc. It's threatening on getting to the moment that we got to in Discovery Season 4, where it was just spoilers. We have to get Book back. Where's Book? And like 5 episodes end like that. Thankfully, we've ended that here. But unfortunately, we ended it the way many Star Trek seasons have either began or ended in the last few years. We end up surrounded by a million different ships popping into existence like they do since 2009. I've just seen it so many times. It's Picard season 1 ended like that. Picard season 2 had it. Discovery had it all over the place. It's getting a little tiresome. I thought a series or season like Prodigy could have come up with something a little bit more clever, but it appears like we're going to end on just a bombastic shoot 'em up. I hope that's not the case. Lower Decks last season kind of ended like that. Just put a lot of ships on screen. A lot of ships are cool. When you have a lot of ships on screen, it makes the ships feel small. It makes them not feel grand, which is what you don't want for Starfleet and or Star Trek. Okay, you want large capital ships battling from great distances. Space battles are scary. They're easy to lose and hard to win. Let's reflect that by not having a zillion ships on screen, maybe. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm jumping the gun and the next 2 episodes totally don't fulfill what I'm guessing here. But at the end, there was a lot of ships, which is par for the course for modern Trek, all in one point, all beaming in instantaneously at the same time. Admittedly, they were very bright, very canon, and we saw a lot of ship classes that are correct for this era, and that's worth praising. At this juncture of Star Trek, it's worth praising canon ships being well lit. I'll say that. We'll see how they play out in the next 2 episodes. That being, I think, a 2-parter. Hopefully it's going to be a good Christmas present for those of you who are waiting for a Star Trek episode under your tree, so to speak. If you care about that sort of thing. This episode wasn't that much of a gift, but it wasn't a detriment either. It wasn't exactly a lump of coal. Okay? It got the plot moving. It kept me interested. I was glued to the screen the entire time, and the whole mind swap thing played out, but it makes sense. Organians could do that. Dal has Organian DNA. Warp bubbles can merge. It's happened before. There's a lot of precedence here. Precedence isn't a license to do whatever you want, but on repeat viewings, it left me less confused. Like I said, I'm confused exactly about the capabilities now of the living construct. Why can't the living construct close EVA doors if it has total control? Why is the protostar leaving the Dauntless? Why wouldn't the living construct make it so the protostar would just stay there and until it eventually infected the Dauntless? Why wouldn't it do that? Why did the Dauntless need Dr. Newham to make visual contact with the protostar for them to know it's there despite perimeter alerts? Is the protostar that stealthy? Are we going to go back to the future to save Chakotay? We've only got 2 episodes left to do that. That was Mind Walk. And did we go on a Mind Walk? Did we Mind Walk through space? Having thought about it, usually if you EVA maneuvers are called spacewalks. This was a spacewalk in order to swap minds. A mind walk, I guess. Maybe I'm grasping at strings to try to come up with why that name is what it is. Everything is settled at the end, except we're now surrounded by Starfleet. And Janeway knows what we know. We're at a fundamentally different point at the end of this than we were at the end of the last episode, which is a good sign in terms of moving the plot along. It's a sign that this episode is necessary. Like I said, thematically, intrigue, yes, though, that's good. A window into the Diviner's mind. Is it illogical, or is it character development? That's up to you. Musically, fantastic. Some of the best I've heard in a while. Visually, you're on board the Dauntless. How can you complain? We spend this entire episode inside a warp field. Is it quantum slipstream drive? Is that why it looks like that? I don't know. Protostar looking cool. Murph looking cool. Every frame of this episode that had Murph in it, I was just staring at Murph, waiting for Murph to do something funny. Who can complain? Visually, right? With all that being said, I think it wins more than it loses. It beats the previous episode. I'm going to have to go with a 5.5. It gets the job done. I may not return to it on repeat viewings. In fact, I probably won't. Not much to think about, but it's ultimately a necessary episode that, like I said, wins good on a few pillars, I say, of Star Trek episode quality. But those pillars are not the main pillar. That being the theme, the message. Maybe a mind swap could have been a little bit deeper thematically if Janeway could talk to hologram Janeway and there was something to exchange. Maybe. I thought something was happening there, but it didn't quite stick. It was interesting seeing Janeway talk to Janeway. That's Mind Walk. I'm not super disappointed. You know how my review scores work. 5 is average for me. 5 is normal. I think modern review scales are somewhat inflated. You know how people say 10 is perfect, 9 is good, 8 is good, 7 and below, garbage. I don't believe that. That's not true. 5, like I said, that's the finish line. We got to the finish line and then some. Not enough to really be a 6, but here's hoping for the last 2 episodes. And as I said before, these next 2 episodes are going to have to be really bad to ruin this season for me. This is Prodigy. That was the Protostar. And this was their Mind Walk. And this is my review. I'm Lieutenant Mark, and I'm going to see you when next time I see you. Goodbye.